Good evening. I'm Tony Crush. Tonight, we journey into a profoundly disturbing case that strikes not just at the heart of a personal tragedy, but at the very integrity of the institution sworn to protect us. This is a story that begins with the questionable death of a young, vulnerable woman, Sandra Birchmore, a death initially dismissed as a suicide. But what unfolds is a chilling saga of alleged long-term grooming and horrific sexual abuse by multiple police officers, men she admired, men she trusted from her teenage years. It's a narrative of a family's relentless fight for truth against a system that seemed determined to bury its secrets, and the eventual intervention of federal authorities that would turn the official story on its head. This case compels us to ask the gravest of questions: who polices the police when those in uniform, those endowed with power and authority, become the very predators they are meant to shield us from? The chilling timeline of Sandra Birchmore's final days begins on the cold evening of February 1st, 2021. A formidable blizzard was relentlessly bearing down on Canton, Massachusetts, a generally quiet suburban town located south of Boston, promising to blanket the region in a thick shroud of snow. Security cameras at the Canton Woods Apartments captured the image of 23-year-old Sandra Birchmore, a young woman with her whole life seemingly ahead of her. She was seen briefly leaving her apartment unit and then returning, an ordinary act, perhaps after clearing the accumulating snow off her car in weary anticipation of being snowbound for at least a day, maybe more. This mundane, fleeting footage would later become agonizingly pivotal, as it was the very last time anyone, save for the individual who would later be accused of her murder, saw Sandra Birchmore alive. 3 long, then snow-filled days later, on the morning of Thursday, February 4th, 2021, officers from the Canton Police Department were dispatched to Sandra's apartment to perform a welfare check. A concerned individual from Sharon Public Schools, where Sandra worked as an instructional assistant, had contacted law enforcement. Sandra hadn't reported to work, and given the recent storm, there was a baseline level of concern. The blizzard had indeed caused widespread cancellations of events and school closures earlier in the week. But by midweek, most locations in the area had returned to their regular operational schedules. Sandra Birchmore, however, remained conspicuously and ominously unaccounted for. When the Canton police officers gained entry to her apartment, they found Sandra in her bedroom. The scene was immediately grim. She was on the floor, a strap secured around her neck, the other end of this strap also attached, almost methodically, to the closet door. From the condition of her body, it was immediately apparent to the responding officers that she had been deceased for some considerable time, likely several days. For some of the officers present at that scene, Sandra's death was not just another unfortunate call, another statistic in a day's work. It was, or should have been, a deeply personal loss. Sandra Birchmore had been an enthusiastic and dedicated participant in the Stoughton Police Department's Explorer program during her teenage years. This program, a kind of junior police academy often run by local departments, is designed for youths who express an interest in pursuing a career in law enforcement, offering them a chance to learn about police work and prepare to potentially join a department. Sandra had spent 6 formative years in this junior academy, from the tender age of 12 or 13, and as a result, she had become familiar, even friendly, with numerous officers across Norfolk County, particularly those from the neighboring town of Stoughton, where the program was based. Now, these very individuals, men she had looked up to, were confronted with the harsh, undeniable reality of her unexpected and deeply disturbing death. The initial assessment of the scene, as reported by Canton Police Officer Cottard and his 2 colleagues, was that they observed nothing inherently suspicious, despite what they officially described as quite a bit of clutter inside Sandra's home. They reported that all items appeared to be in their intended, undisturbed locations. There were, they noted, No overt or obvious signs of a struggle having taken place. No items knocked over or strewn about in a violent manner. No telltale scuff marks or fresh indentations on the walls, nor any drag marks on the carpeting that might suggest a body had been moved. These cursory, initial observations, when paired with the specific manner in which they discovered Sandra in her bedroom, appeared to lead them quickly, perhaps too quickly, to one seemingly straightforward, albeit tragic conclusion. Sandra Birchmore, at the age of 23, had made a deeply tragic choice to end her own life. In the painful days that followed this initial ruling, as Sandra's grieving family members began the heart-wrenching task of cleaning out her apartment, they found numerous, poignant indications that pointed away from a planned suicide. They discovered a young woman whose life appeared to have been abruptly, violently interrupted. A life that was clearly in the midst of active doing and hopeful planning for other things. There were wet clothes found still inside the washing machine and another completed load left untouched in the dryer. Newly purchased items sat out, still in their original packaging, unopened. More packages, items ordered by Sandra online shortly before her death, continued to be delivered to her home in the days after her body was found. Most troubling and heartbreaking, however, was the specific nature of what was contained within these packages: a brand new, unassembled baby stroller, stacks of newborn onesies, various other articles of infant clothing, and an assortment of essential baby items. Sandra Birchmore, her family knew, had been 3 months pregnant at the time of her death, and, by all accounts from those closest to her, she was absolutely thrilled about the prospect of becoming a mother. Friends later found a lovingly made poster in her apartment that read, "Congratulations, you're going to be a father." This celebratory sign was adorned with a precious ultrasound photo and had been carefully sprinkled with glitter. If these clear and unambiguous signs of an excited, expectant mother were not, in themselves, enough to raise serious, profound questions about how exactly Sandra Birchmore had died, her family members also discovered what they firmly believed could be physical signs of a violent struggle within her bedroom. A favorite necklace of Sandra's, a delicate, thin gold chain adorned with a distinctive pink flamingo charm, a piece of jewelry she was often photographed wearing, was found broken, lying on her bedroom floor. When first responders had initially found Sandra's body, the necklace was reportedly still hanging off the left side of her neck, but it was snapped open, significantly not at its clasp, with a large, noticeable clump of what appeared to be her hair entangled within the broken chain. The family immediately reported these deeply concerning findings, including the broken necklace and the details of her pregnancy, to law enforcement. They emphasized to investigators how utterly ecstatic Sandra had been about her pregnancy, a joy that seemed utterly incompatible with the idea of suicide. Regardless of these pleas and the mounting circumstantial evidence suggesting foul play, the initial conclusion of suicide, reached from that cursory, on-site examination of the scene, seemed to have been generally and perhaps too readily accepted by the local law enforcement agencies involved. They gave no immediate indication that they were reassessing this initial conclusion. An officer, tasked with the unenviable duty of calling Sandra's aunt to inform her of the tragic discovery, was recorded making the call. The aunt's heartbroken exclamation, "Oh my God, she was so happy to be pregnant," underscored the family's profound disbelief. The officer noted that the medical examiner's office would perform an autopsy, but the prevailing theory pushed by local police remained, stubbornly, suicide. Sandra's journey to this tragic and untimely end was, sadly, paved with significant early life hardship and vulnerability. She had lost her mother, with whom she had shared an extremely close and loving bond, at a very young and impressionable age. Shortly thereafter, another devastating blow came with the sudden loss of her grandmother. Her biological father had reportedly never been a consistent or supportive presence in her life. These cumulative losses understandably led to significant emotional and psychological problems for Sandra, for which she had received professional treatment over the years, and she continued to see a therapist regularly right up until the time of her death. Her troubled childhood and her inherent vulnerabilities were reportedly well known to the adults who remained in her life, a circle that crucially included the very police officers who were running the Stoughton Young Explorers Academy, the program she joined around the age of 12 or 13 in 2010, and in which she actively participated until 2016. The head of that program for much of that time, Robert Devine, would later characterize Sandra as being obsessed with police officers. Friends and family suggested that this intense admiration for law enforcement figures might have stemmed from a deep-seated, perhaps subconscious, desire to find trustworthy, protective, and authoritative figures in her life, given her early experiences of loss and instability. Despite her personal challenges, Sandra was actively making plans for her future. She was taking classes in preparation for applying to nursing school, a career path that would allow her to help others. And, most significantly, she was deeply involved in preparing for motherhood. On February 1st, 2021, the very day that she died, she was actively making plans related to the baby. She had an important OB/GYN appointment scheduled for February 10th. She had already contacted a photographer to arrange for newborn photos. She was planning an official pregnancy announcement and coordinating a gender reveal party. Her online activity on that final afternoon included numerous searches for pregnancy-related information and various brands of baby products. Her last known physical movements were also captured by the apartment building's surveillance system. She was seen entering her building in the early afternoon, engaged in a conversation on her cell phone at approximately 5 p.m. Sandra again went down to the main lobby of her building, this time to collect a DoorDash food delivery. Roughly 45 minutes after that, around 5:33 p.m., after timestamp corrections, she exited her apartment building once more, very briefly, to clear some accumulating snow off of her car before returning inside. This was the last time she was seen alive. When police officers arrived at her home for the welfare check 3 days later, her car was found still completely covered in a thick blanket of snow from the blizzard, a clear indication that she had not traveled anywhere since that storm had hit days before. As the Massachusetts State Police, who were assigned to the Norfolk District Attorney's Office, began to conduct their initial investigation into Sandra's now highly suspicious death, conversations with her distraught family members, her concerned friends, and her somewhat perplexed co-workers routinely, and with increasing emphasis, directed their attention towards one specific individual, the man whom Sandra had openly, and with apparent excitement, alleged was the father of her unborn child. That man, they would soon confirm, was Stoughton Police Department Detective Matthew Farwell. Farwell, then 38 years old, was a married man. He and his wife, Michelle, had married in 2013, and he was already the father of 2 children, with a 3rd child, in a cruel and bizarre twist of fate, due to be born to his wife literally the day after Sandra's death. Detective Matthew Farwell had also been an instructor with the Stoughton Police Explorers program since joining the Stoughton Department back in 2012. It was there, in that program designed to mentor young people, that he first met Sandra Birchmore. She would have been a vulnerable 14 or 15-year-old girl at the time. He was a 27-year-old police officer in a position of significant trust and authority. When questioned by his investigating colleagues from the state police, Matthew Farwell readily admitted to having reconnected with Sandra, then 23 years old, several months before her death. He claimed, somewhat implausibly, that after a night out involving too much alcohol, they had been intimate on one occasion. He further confessed, perhaps reluctantly, to meeting with her once or twice more after that initial encounter. However, Detective Farwell vehemently and repeatedly denied the assertion that he had impregnated Sandra. The timing, he insisted, simply did not add up. He further asserted that, more recently, he had been actively distancing himself from her, and then, he claimed, he had formally and assertively broken things off with her for good. This definitive breakup, he stated, had occurred on the evening of February 1st, the night Sandra died, at Sandra's apartment. It had been, he described, a nasty argument, but he adamantly insisted that she was alive, though admittedly very upset when he left her apartment that night. This self-serving narrative from Detective Farwell might have initially fooled, or perhaps been willingly accepted by, some of his fellow law enforcement officers, individuals who were likely predisposed to believe a colleague, particularly in such a sensitive and potentially damaging situation. However, his claims convinced absolutely no one who truly knew Sandra Birchmore. She was widely known for her almost childlike openness, her tendency to overshare even the most intimate details of her personal life, apparently even with those whom she had only known for a very short time. In fact, Sandra's propensity for oversharing was a behavior that, at times, reportedly made even her own co-workers uncomfortable. Those even closer to her, such as her extended family members, had been made aware of deeply upsetting details about her life and relationships that often caused them significant concern. Her cousin, to whom Sandra had confided some of her deepest secrets, revealed a particularly disturbing piece of information. Sandra's latest pregnancy was not, in fact, her first pregnancy by a police officer. She had previously told her cousin that she had suffered a miscarriage some time before, and that the father of that lost child had also been a police officer. Her family knew Sandra was absolutely ecstatic about this new pregnancy. Becoming a mother was her greatest wish. In May 2021, despite the family's growing concerns and the suspicious circumstances, the Massachusetts State Medical Examiner's Office officially ruled Sandra Birchmore's manner of death as suicide by asphyxia. But Sandra's family, armed with their knowledge of her joy about the pregnancy and the troubling details surrounding her relationships with Stoughton police officers, refused to accept this ruling. They knew Sandra, they knew her dreams, and the official story simply didn't fit the vibrant, hopeful young woman they loved. Detective Matthew Farwell's admission of a sexual relationship with Sandra, however he attempted to downplay or frame it, inevitably prompted a formal internal affairs investigation at the Stoughton Police Department. This internal investigation was ostensibly tasked with uncovering the full truth of what may have occurred during Sandra's vulnerable years as a participant in the department's Young Explorers program. The shocking, deeply disturbing, and frankly sickening details of this internal affairs report were eventually released to the public in September 2022, and they painted a truly horrific picture of exploitation and abuse. Stoughton Police Chief Donna McNamara, in a very public and damning statement, described Sandra Birchmore as a vulnerable person whose lifelong, almost naive admiration for people in uniform, police officers, military personnel, anyone sworn to protect and serve, had been ruthlessly exploited. She was failed by, manipulated by, and used by people of authority that she admired and trusted, Chief McNamara stated, right up until her final days. The internal investigation concluded, with what appeared to be substantial evidence, that 3 serving members of the Stoughton Police Department, Detective Matthew Farwell, his own twin brother, Officer William Farwell, and the former Stoughton Deputy Police Chief and one-time head of the Police Explorers program, Robert Devine, had all played a significant and predatory role in the long-term grooming and sexual abuse of Sandra Birchmore. Evidence uncovered by Internal Affairs strongly suggested that Matthew Farwell's personal, sexual relationship with Sandra began when she was just 15 years old, and he was a 27-year-old police officer and explorer program instructor, an act constituting statutory rape under Massachusetts law, where the legal age of consent is 16. The investigation also found, with chilling implications, that both William Farwell Matthews' twin and Robert Devine's alleged physical relationships with Sandra were potentially ongoing, or at least very recent, around the time of her death. William Farwell was even accused of attempting to introduce Sandra to other men for sexual purposes, and at least one additional police officer from another department, later publicly named as Abington Police Officer Josh Heel, was implicated as being complicit in this web of exploitation. Robert Devine, it was also noted, had a history. He had previously been involved in a department scandal back in 2014, which involved the circulation of graphic photos of him with a mistress. That earlier scandal had resulted in his demotion from deputy chief to patrol officer, but, astonishingly to many, not his removal from the police force. In the immediate wake of the explosive internal investigation into Sandra Birchmore's case, all three implicated Stoughton officers, the Farwell brothers and Robert Devine, abruptly resigned from the department. Steps were then initiated to ensure that they were permanently decertified, thereby preventing them from ever working in law enforcement again in Massachusetts, though Robert Devine initially contested his decertification. The evidence of prolonged abuse and egregious misconduct by these officers was significant enough to draw widespread public condemnation and utter disgust. Yet the Norfolk County District Attorney's Office initially declined to bring any criminal charges directly related to this abuse, claiming the case was too weak or too difficult to pursue successfully in criminal court, despite multiple witnesses who could speak to the disturbing details Sandra herself had shared with them over the years. The internal investigation also found, troublingly, that at least one individual had attempted to report Matthew Farwell's inappropriate and potentially illegal relationship with Sandra directly to the Stoughton Police Department as early as January 2021, just weeks before her death. A friend of Sandra's, to whom Sandra apparently owed some money, had called the department to try to report a dispute they were having. During that call, the friend explicitly told the officer on the phone that Detective Matthew Farwell should perhaps look into getting her money back for her, since he was, as the friend stated, currently in a sexual relationship with Sandra. Instead of this deeply concerning information being officially reported up the chain of command and triggering an immediate investigation into potential statutory rape and officer misconduct, the officer who took the call chose only to mention it directly, and presumably informally, to Matthew Farwell himself. Farwell then allegedly told that officer to keep the information quiet, and not to mention it to anyone else, which is precisely what happened, allowing the dangerous situation to continue unchecked. Another friend of Sandra's also approached police immediately following Sandra's death, providing information that directly implicated Detective Farwell in suspected foul play concerning her death. The public outcry following the release of the Internal Affairs report was immense. It seemed utterly inconceivable to many that Sandra Birchmore could have been involved in these exploitative relationships with so many officers, over so many years, without it becoming, at the very least, an open secret, something known and perhaps even tacitly accepted or discussed amongst officers within the Stoughton Department and potentially across other departments in Norfolk County. The case quickly fueled broader, deeply troubling concerns about a possible culture of police corruption and mutual protection within the county. These concerns were tragically amplified by another highly controversial and widely publicized case unfolding in Canton around the same time the death of Boston police officer John O'Keefe and the subsequent contentious murder trial of his girlfriend, Karen Reed. Reed's defense attorneys aggressively alleged a complex police cover-up and the framing of their client by local law enforcement officers, some of whom, it was noted, also had connections to the investigation of Sandra Birchmore's death. Protesters at the Karen Reed trial began to link the two cases, carrying signs that demanded justice for Sandra Birchmore alongside those calling to free Karen Reed, highlighting a growing public distrust. Despite the initial official ruling of suicide by the state medical examiner and the Norfolk County District Attorney's Office's apparent reluctance to aggressively pursue foul play charges against one of their own, Sandra Birchmore's grieving family refused to let her case be closed or her story be silenced. They courageously filed a wrongful death lawsuit in late 2022 against the town of Stoughton and the 3 implicated former officers, Matthew Farwell, William Farwell, and Robert Devine. Their lawsuit alleged a horrifying, years-long grooming scheme undertaken by these members of law enforcement, which, they argued, ultimately and foreseeably resulted in Sandra's tragic death through a combination of negligence, infliction of emotional distress, and other tortious acts. Crucially, they also took the significant step of seeking a second, independent opinion on the actual cause of Sandra's death. They reached out to the prominent and highly respected forensic pathologist, Dr. Michael Baden, though other reports also credit another independent expert, Dr. William Smock, with reaching similar conclusions. Dr. Baden meticulously examined all the original autopsy reports, crime scene photos, and related documentation. His professional conclusions, when delivered, directly and unequivocally contradicted the initial findings of the state medical examiner. Dr. Baden found that Sandra Birchmore had not died by hanging, as initially ruled. Instead, he determined she had died as a result of strangulation. The manner of her death, in his expert and widely respected opinion, was clearly homicide. This powerful independent finding, coupled with the mounting public pressure and the deeply disturbing revelations from the Stoughton PD's own internal affairs report, finally prompted federal authorities, including the Federal Bureau of Investigation (FBI), to take over the stalled and highly controversial investigation into Sandra Birchmore's death. The FBI, in turn, reportedly had 2 additional independent medical examiners review all the available evidence. Both of these experts, it was reported, agreed with Dr. Baden's determination Sandra Birchmore had been attacked. There had indeed been a struggle, however brief, and she had been killed. Had local detectives thoroughly and impartially extracted and scrutinized Sandra's voluminous digital correspondence with Matthew Farwell in the initial stages of their investigation, they would have discovered the true, disturbing, and manipulative dynamic of their long-term relationship. Recovered messages detailed a nearly decade-long pattern of control and exploitation, with Farwell, a man then in his late 30s and a figure of authority, manipulating the young and exceptionally vulnerable Sandra, who, from a young age, had tragically idolized him as a police officer. The entire dynamic of their clandestine relationship shifted dramatically and dangerously on December 28, 2020. It was on this date that Sandra Birchmore informed Detective Matthew Farwell that she was pregnant with his child. His reaction, as evidenced by subsequent texts, was not one of joy or support, but of anger and denial. Sandra had confided in friends that Farwell was furious about the pregnancy, that they had argued intensely over whether he would acknowledge paternity and sign the birth certificate, and that she had told him she expected substantial financial support, including $4,000 a month in child support and an additional $3,000 for daycare. At one point during these heated exchanges, she recounted to friends that he had callously told her, "That's not my child," and even more chillingly, "I just wished she would die." Text messages recovered by federal investigators laid bare her anguish and his fury. "I'm mad you're acting how you are over a choice we both made," Sandra had texted Farwell. He had callously retorted, "I'm mad you act like you gave anyone a choice, LMAO. Oh, so you didn't have a choice per usual. You make and do whatever you want." Sandra's poignant and revealing reply followed, "You're mad she's Farwell's wife. Due in February, and I'm in September, and you don't know how you're going to be there for both of us. You are truly the worst person on the face of the earth." Matthew Farwell's anger was further piqued, and and his paranoia likely heightened after Sandra's friend had called the Stoughton Police Department, inadvertently exposing their illicit relationship to at least one of his colleagues. He texted Sandra with evident agitation. "Like you have no idea how bad what she did is. I literally can't believe this is even real life." Like, what else do I have to worry about now? Which other friend will do something tomorrow? At least 3 of Sandra's friends, with whom she was in close contact in the weeks leading up to her death, later told FBI agents that Matthew Farwell had grown physically violent with her during their intense arguments about the pregnancy. In one instance, just 10 days before she died, he had reportedly become enraged with her for showing him a fetal sonogram. According to what Sandra told her friends, his callous response was, "That's not my child. I don't want anything really to do with you." He then, allegedly and violently, pushed the petite 4-foot 10-inch Sandra to the ground. Then, with a chilling shift that investigators now see as deeply sinister, about 1 week before Sandra's murder, Matthew Farwell's overt anger seemed to abruptly disappear. He began responding to her messages about the pregnancy in a surprisingly positive, almost conciliatory manner. He agreed that they could discuss the possibility of him using his name on the birth certificate. He also, significantly, reminded Sandra of an offer she had apparently made some time before to give him a key to her Canton apartment, an offer he had pointedly declined back in October, stating at that time that it was a bad idea for him to keep a key. But now, in the last week of January 2021, records show that he had a key to her apartment made. He also requested the passcode to enter her Canton Woods apartment building, specifically asking Sandra if it was a universal code used by all residents or if it was a code uniquely assigned to her unit. On January 24th, only a few days before she was killed, Sandra texted a friend about a recent visit from Farwell. "He asked me if I'd give him a key," she wrote, "and said that if I keep it a secret, meaning the baby, he'll be around and see them and all that. Then he looked in my closet and then the bathroom, but I don't know why. Haven't figured that out." To another friend, she reiterated his odd behavior. "But like last night, he opened my closet door for something and then he went into my bathroom looking at my bathroom. It was just really odd. He started looking around. I don't know." Federal investigators now firmly believe he was meticulously scoping out her apartment, planning the murder and how to stage it. On the night Sandra died, February 1st, 2021, she was last definitively seen alive on surveillance video at approximately 5:33 p.m. after official timestamps on the apartment security camera footage were found to be 13 minutes off of real time and subsequently corrected. Later that same evening, at just after 9 p.m., Matthew Farwell sent Sandra a text message, casually asking whether he could come by for a second. Surveillance video from her apartment building clearly shows Matthew Farwell entering the Canton apartment building at 9:14 p.m. In this crucial surveillance video, he is wearing ordinary street clothes, a hoodie with the hood pulled up concealing his head, and a face mask. Multiple witnesses, including colleagues, later told FBI investigators that Detective Farwell strongly resisted wearing a face mask during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic. He would reportedly only wear one when explicitly on duty, and directly required by department policy to do so. His choice to wear one that night, off-duty, was therefore highly suspicious. The surveillance video further shows that Matthew Farwell left Sandra's apartment building at 9:43 p.m. approximately 29 minutes after he entered. He later told police that this was the time he had his final argument with Sandra and definitively broke off their supposedly brief affair. He steadfastly claimed that she was alive and physically unharmed, albeit upset, when he left her apartment. However, crucial data recovered from Sandra's iPhone told a different and far more chilling story. Her phone's health app data showed that her last physical movement was recorded that night at exactly 9:40 p.m. 3 critical minutes before Matthew Farwell was captured on surveillance video leaving her apartment. In those final registered moments of activity, she had moved only 8 steps. Her iPhone was later found by investigators lying on the floor, approximately 12 feet from her right hand. The phone eventually powered off due to battery loss 2 days later, on February the 3rd, before her body was discovered. Federal authorities alleged that Matthew Farwell, driven by a desperate desire to silence Sandra and conceal their illicit, years-long relationship and her inconvenient pregnancy, chose to murder her at an opportune moment. His own wife, they noted, had gone into labor that very day, a situation that would naturally preoccupy her and potentially provide him with an alibi or at least a period of reduced scrutiny. The incoming blizzard also, they contended, gave him cover. He knew it was highly likely to delay anyone discovering Sandra in her apartment for at least a day, possibly more, giving him time. After allegedly meticulously scoping out her apartment the week before, the detective, professionally trained and demonstrably adept in crime scene analysis from his years on the force, brutally strangled Sandra Birchmore. He then, prosecutors allege, coldly and methodically staged the murder scene in a calculated attempt to deceive his own law enforcement colleagues into believing she had died by suicide. He then, it is argued, relied upon those very law enforcement loyalties, the infamous blue wall of silence, to cast a willfully blind eye on the rapidly accumulating mountain of evidence that pointed directly and overwhelmingly towards him as her killer. On August 28, 2024, as per the original source text, though some public reports indicate the indictment occurred slightly earlier in the summer of 2024, Matthew Farwell was arrested by federal authorities. He was indicted on 1 count of killing a witness or victim, a serious federal charge more commonly applied in cases of organized crime or obstruction of justice, which allowed the district attorneys and the FBI to retain crucial jurisdiction over a case that had been so egregiously bungled and clouded by allegations of corruption at the local and state official levels. As of the time of this recording, Matthew Farwell remains in federal custody, awaiting trial. If convicted on this federal charge, he may face penalties up to and including the death penalty. An investigation published in early 2024 by the Marshall Project, a nonprofit journalism organization focusing on criminal justice, detailed a disturbing history of sexual abuse and misconduct allegations within law enforcement. Explorer programs across the United States. It found that officers involved did not always face criminal prosecutions for their predatory actions. And among those that did, only about half were sentenced to significant time behind bars. Documents provided by the Stoughton Police Department itself regarding their Explorer program reportedly showed a program run with alarmingly little oversight. The department has since stated that their Explorer program is no longer in operation. The wider allegations of police corruption in Norfolk County, Massachusetts, fueled in part by the Sandra Birchmore case and the controversial Karen Reed trial, eventually resulted in a public vote authorizing a full independent audit to be undertaken of the Canton Police Department. Protesters who had called for this vote carried signs that poignantly read, "Free Karen Reed" and "Justice for Sandra Birchmore," forever linking these two deeply troubling sagas. The tragic story of Sandra Birchmore is not just about one young woman's life so cruelly and prematurely taken, but it is a harrowing indictment of systemic failures, the catastrophic abuse of power by those sworn to protect, and a testament to the unwavering courage of a family that refused to let her memory be silenced or her true story be buried. It's a stark and brutal reminder that the fight for justice can be an agonizingly long and arduous road, one that often demands an unwavering voice against a formidable wall of silence and corruption. I'm Tony Crush. Thank you for listening.